there's this quote from Hannah Arendt that just keeps haunting me. And I kind of welcome this haunting. Oftentimes we do not want to be haunted. I kind of welcome this haunting. I'll just be sitting at my son's mercilessly long 5-hour track meet or mowing the lawn or doing the dishes. And I'll be, having broken strands of music lyrics and ideas for teaching and ideas for research bouncing around in my head. And all of a sudden, this quote from Hannah Arendt will bounce back into my mind. And here is the quote. Unlike the tools of workmanship, which at every given moment in the work process remain the servants of the hand, the machines demand that the laborer serve them, that he adjusts the natural rhythm of his body to their mechanical movement. I think about that all the time when it comes to artificial intelligence and AI critical literacy. Are the AI the tool in her dichotomy, the thing that is made to make our lives better, to ease the burden of the human condition? Or are the AI the machines that she writes in a warning of, that she says these are going to hurt the free exchange of ideas, the flow of information ideas, they're going to hurt our teaching, they're going to hurt our students and our futures? Are AI the tools, or are they the machines that she warned us about? It's a lot to think about, but I think it can provide us, of course, the dichotomy is always a problem, right? It doesn't have to be one or the other. The problem can lie somewhere in both or between both, but it does provide us a little lens through which we can think about how or which way we want to engage or not engage with AI in our teaching and AI in our learning. I hope that could be kind of a useful construct as we think about AI critical literacy and as we think about today's episode. Today's episode is episode 6 of the University of Missouri Teaching for Learning Center's AI Critical Literacy podcast. We are going over the final 2 chapters of Ethan Mollick's book, Co-Intelligence. And these chapters have a real focus on expertise and the future of expertise. The idea of teaching and learning expertise in the sense that we as instructors and teachers bring into the classroom. Also in the sense of expertise that comes to our students as they graduate, and the idea of developing expertise in our programs, but also after they graduate. I have the perfect guest for this episode. It is Eric Parsons. Eric Parsons is an associate teaching professor of economics, also the faculty fellow for the College of Arts and Sciences. And he has also a specialization in labor economics. So he's kind of the perfect person. He's been looking into and thinking about AI and providing resources for his colleagues about AI. And at the same time, he has a built-in knowledge area about labor and economics. So we had a great conversation. I hope you find this conversation useful. My name is Jared Schroeder, by the way, and I am the host of this podcast and also an associate professor at the Missouri School of Journalism and an AI teaching fellow at the Teaching for Learning Center. Again, I hope you enjoy our conversation.
So I'm Eric Parsons. I'm an associate teaching professor and the director of undergraduate studies in the Department of Economics here at the University of Missouri. I'm also currently serving as the College of Arts and Science faculty fellow for AI and teaching. As far as my first experience with AI, interestingly enough, so I obviously remember when ChatGPT went public and the news around that. But interestingly, I had an economics student who I had agreed to do an independent study with before ChatGPT became public. And the idea of this, the student approached me and was interested in a topic that we don't offer a course on here in the department. And they had come up with a reading list, and they were going to read a number of books, provide, reviews of each book, and then do a synthesis at the end was kind of what we agreed on. If this had happened after ChatGPT, I would probably not have agreed to this setup, but I had already agreed to it. As they submitted their assignments, it was very, very clear that they were just asking ChatGPT for a summary of each of the books for a number of reasons. One, this was early ChatGPT. The writing was poor and very repetitive, so you could tell from that. Also, the book reviews were only supposed to be 3 to 5 pages, and they were writing submitting 10 to 15 page book reviews. I also could go into their Word documents and see this document was started at 1 p.m. and completed at 1:15. So
Wow.
It was extremely obvious. So that was kind of my first experience of, whoa, this definitely changes things for us as instructors.
So the student was a pioneer of a pioneer or a cheater. So what did you end up doing with that class or with that directed study?
on the pioneer side, they were a pioneer in the sense of like in the old Oregon Trail game, like when you die of dysentery,
Yes.
like on the trail. But ultimately, the student failed the class and was submitted to the Office of Academic Integrity, which they admitted that they had used AI to produce the output because it was very, very obvious. That was so ultimately kind of a sad outcome on that one. But it was so blatant that it seemed like that was the appropriate way. And it was not necessarily something in my field. I felt like I was doing the student a favor to agree to help them do with this independent study. And so it was troubling to me in that sense as well. That they would try to put so little effort in something that they seemed very enthusiastic about and, kind of begged to have this opportunity to do the independent study.
Yeah. No,
that was an interesting first go.
Yeah. I love that you framed it as it's like Oregon Trail and you died of dysentery. That's hilarious. That's funny. So the two chapters in the Mollick book this week, really the AI as a coach chapter, the first of the two, was richer than I expected it to be.
Yes.
Topically, you think AI as a coach, maybe this is going to be one of the weaker because it's not a teaching book. It's a book about other things.
Yep.
But it's turned out to be just such an incredible, and I think he's actually convinced me a little bit. I started out very skeptical. I think as a journalist should be. I was like, I don't know if this guy really knows his stuff, but I think I've kind of come around. I was more skeptical in earlier episodes, but I've turned out to use a lot of it. So in the AI as a coach chapter, he starts out talking about, it's a pretty bold claim. He's basically saying that the real threat to education doesn't happen necessarily in the classroom, that the future of education's greatest threat isn't necessarily while we're doing the actual education things, kind of going back to your story, but the bigger threat is after graduation. This threat, like the chapter was almost more about expertise, I felt like, and the future of expertise. Yes. And so what did you take from those passages?
So I kind of agree with them, although I do think it's a bit of both. And I think they feed into each other.
Right.
If in their formal education, because of AI, students build fewer skills, then they enter into the workforce with fewer skills. And so then it's that much easier for, the senior people to use AI instead of the entry-level people to help out and kind of give them their training. Because I think that was his argument is training new employees is always difficult and time consuming. So if AI can do it quickly and easily without the human angst, right? That many, the senior people, the people hire with more experience are just going to use AI instead of actually spending the time to train those new employees. That becomes an even bigger problem if the new employees come in with fewer skills. So I think like both things are really important and really matter. And I guess in a sense, it's a bit related. There's a classic debate in labor economics. So I'm an economist and a labor economist, in fact, as well. And the classic debate, it's the theory of education. So is education human capital building, which means is it building the skills and knowledge you need to be a productive worker, or is it signaling? So it's not the specific skills that you're developing in education that matter. The education is a signal that you can complete something and do something difficult. That's kind of what the education provides. And I think obviously the answer is somewhere in the middle. And I think it depends on the level, whether we're talking, K through 12 education, higher education. Even in higher education, it probably depends on the major to some extent as well. It's always a mix of both. The more signaling matters, the more truth there is, I think, to Mollick's argument. Right? Because if most of the actual skills that you need to be a productive worker, you learn on the job after you get out of your formal education, then his argument, I think, becomes like really, really important. And even on that human capital side, once again, it's a question of the skills that you bring to bear. It's something I've actually talked about a few times with in discussions on campus and other places. I think it's this idea of expertise. As faculty members, I think it's super easy for us to like look at an AI and work with an AI and see how powerful it can be to enhance our productivity, because we're all highly skilled and we're all experts in our field and we bring a lot of expertise to it. The challenge is we got to make sure that our students, when they come out, have some skills and some expertise to build on, or they can never take advantage of those things that we see as so obvious.
So no, it makes a lot of sense that like I tried to do something like that in class today because it's one thing I want to talk to you about because I think you teach a large lecture class too, and I'm
Yes. Yes.
struggling with how to engage with my students and AI. But I went through, well, I had them look up on whatever AI tool they wanted, a specific prompt I put up saying, what are the key cases in this one area? And they looked them up and I asked them kind of what the cases were, but then I went and taught them the content. And then I came back and I was like, okay, we just talked about this main concepts and these cases that contribute to this. Now let's go back to your searches. Did they provide you the information you needed? I was trying to show them, and I don't know if I'm still trying it different ways, the difference between automation and assistance. And I think that's what you were sort of
Yes.
talking about, like the idea between
100%.
just having it do it for you, but you don't have the expertise to know if it's done right or the expertise to ask the right questions or to evaluate it versus letting it assist you, saying, I know now that I know this content, I can evaluate these cases and say that I don't know why I put that one in there. It doesn't belong in there. And this one's missing and it needs to be there. So I think, yeah, that's one thing that your comment made me think about.
Yeah, I think, that's a theme of Mollick's book is in this AI era, expertise is more important than ever
Mm-hmm.
because AI is really good at putting out content that sounds good, but
Mm-hmm.
may not always be accurate.
Oh, yeah.
It's, even if it's completely wrong and hallucinated, it's going to sound believable and sound good. And so having that expertise to vet it and say, when is it right? When is it wrong? Which ideas should we run with? Which ones we shouldn't is perhaps more important than ever. And, it's this tricky thing of how do you build that expertise that you can stay useful in an era of AI? I think it's a big challenge.
I just wonder if we're going to have like an expertise gap, right? So our students graduate, we've got the senior people who are established in their field and are highly skilled in whatever field it is, are highly skilled, and they use AI. If they use it at all, they use it as an assistant. But
Yep.
but the folks coming in, they don't, like we were worried about, they don't necessarily engage with the folks coming in as much because it's such a pain in the butt to bring people up to speed. But also at the same time, the people who are being brought up to speed or don't have the initial skills and are using AI as a crutch instead of a assistant. And so I wonder if there will be a generation. That's why I was reading his thing. I was like, there's going to be maybe a generational gap in where the old folks, as they retire, no one replaces them with that knowledge.
I think that's definitely a valid fear, and I think that's like maybe the theme of that chapter
Yeah.
is this potential expertise gap and maybe some possible ways to deal with it. But I think it's a challenge.
I guess the question would be, what can the teaching and learning at the University of Missouri do to help avoid that gap, at least for our students?
I think this has somewhat always been an issue. Like students always wonder, like, why do I need to learn this?
Yep.
Before I was teaching at Mizzou, I actually taught at a community college. I taught math, well before the days of ChatGPT. And every semester, I would constantly be asked by students, like, where am I ever going to use this in my real life? I remember one time I was even teaching like compound interest and how you could use it to calculate a car loan. And someone's like, where am I ever going to use it? Well, if I can't sell you on this one, I'm going to have trouble selling anything, right? So I think it's always been an issue, and it's even more of an issue now as it becomes easier to just get the information from AI as opposed to develop the expertise. I think kind of what you did in class, I think it's like one way to go about it is to show when AI fails, right? And walk students through cases where AI sounds right but is incorrect. And that might wake them up in some cases to realize, okay, I actually do need to be paying attention and develop this expertise in these skills. But I do think it's a hard sell, right? I think, students are always skeptical, and I think we probably were when we were young too. And I think it's always hard as, we've went through the process. We know what the end goal is. So we can say with confidence, we're doing this because there's an end goal in mind and you need to build towards that end goal. But as someone who's never seen that end goal, it is really hard for them to always connect the dots. And so I think modeling it to the extent that we can, pointing out the places where AI fails and why you still need that expertise. I do always, in my class, when we talk about labor economics, I specifically talk about what you mentioned about you can use AI as a crutch or you can use it as a tool, right? It's this very powerful tool that can enhance your productivity, which can make you a more valuable worker, earn you higher wages, and so on. If you just use it as a crutch, you are now replaceable. If all the only things you can do are things that AI can do, you are very replaceable. And I think constant messaging on that is useful, but it is um, it students are skeptical and busy and not always fully engaged. And so, I think we hit some of them and we don't always hit all of them. So with then all the message doesn't always stick, I should say.
Yeah.
So,
I think we have to keep experimenting with how to reach them with this.
agreed.
I mean, I think it's been as you mentioned, like for years, I've been working on selling or really being intentional, I guess is probably a better way of saying it, of saying why, like I'm in a very practice oriented school where they want to
Yes.
know how to do the things. And I teach conceptual class that's required of all of them. So I've got this captive audience that did not come here to go to my class, right? And so I'm
That's
very intentional about like, why do you need this? Why do you need that? Like, why are we talking about this today? And so I guess we need to do the same thing with AI, be intentional and be like, how does it work? How does it not work? Like, so I'm going to try. I'm going to keep trying to figure that out.
Oh, I totally understand where you're kind of like I teach the principles of micro class. It's required of all business students. It's required of all journalism students. I think there's a few other like textile power management. It's required. So I get lots of students who didn't come to Mizzou to take Econ 1014 principles of microeconomics. And so even before AI, it's this challenge of engagement. And I feel like I do a reasonably good job, but there's always students who come out of the class who don't see how it's useful and beneficial. I try to always bring in real world examples, connect it to things that I think they'll be interested in. And I think ultimately we're always working in that middle margin, right? How many people can we convince in that middle margin? There's always going to be some people who we never convince.
right.
We just do the best we can.
Spoken like a large lecture veteran, right? That's when I had a
100%.
smaller classes, I could really invest in individual learning needs. But with this big classes I teach, it's right. Every time I try to think of something that will reach more students, it only reaches the students who are already reached. It's like every time I'm like, well, I could do this or I could do that. I'm like, who the only people who are going to engage with this are? The ones that are already engaged. Like,
Yes.
yeah, no matter what I do. He also brought up this idea of shadow learning, which I thought was really interesting and worth noting too. I guess we all do it, right? Like I thought of shadow learning almost like, my sump pump was broken this weekend in my basement and I don't know anything about sump pumps. So I get on YouTube and I start learning about sump pumps and how AI has created a tool that allows our students to offline from our classes learn about the subjects we're teaching. And I was trying to figure out how I felt about that. Like, in some sense, I want to control, which sounds terrible, but like, sometimes I want to control like what they're learning so I can test them and within the context of our class. In other ways, I think it's great if they want to engage with this tool and it could be really helpful.
Yeah, the shadow learning doesn't bother me so much. I actually think it can work pretty well. Now, I'll say I think that's a little bit related to the course I teach. Principles of microeconomics is relatively standard, and no matter which textbook you grab for principles of micro, they're going to be pretty similar. So any outside content that gets probably not going to be in conflict with what I teach in class. So I can understand in other subjects where there's maybe more disagreement in the field, of wider range of coverage, that it could be more problematic. But I do think like for individuals who are motivated to really learn on their own, it is an amazing tool. And so I think it has this very positive benefit along those lines. Once again, if engaged with properly. So
I just wonder how do we encourage the properly part? I mean, it goes back to everything we've talked about so far. It's like sitting here in this podcast, can we come up with the best practices for this for our community right now? And I'm struggling to immediately think of exactly how to encourage the right things and discourage the wrong things.
I agree. And, I've been in this faculty fellows role, I've been thinking about this a lot, and I don't think there's simple solutions. And some of the solutions that are partial solutions, I'll admit, not full solutions, I know some people generally don't like. Like, I actually think I've joked that the advent of AI is kind of the revenge of the blue book. We need to go back to being writing in class with blue books and like in-person essays.
Right. I
think exams, like in-person exams, are going to like become increasingly important because that's one of the few ways anymore you're going to be able to actually see if the person has the skill. Or like in-person assessment, it doesn't necessarily have to be an exam.
Right.
But like in-person debriefs on things. I think those are going to become increasingly important. And I think, so my view on homework, talking the idea that AI has made homework obsolete in a way. My view on homework was, I don't actually feel like AI changed that much. And the reason why is I could always have my smart buddy in class do my homework for me. That was always an option. You're using someone else's intelligence, whether it's AI or a person, to do the work for you. To me, like the purpose of the homework is to help. If you note that the exam's coming, and I'm a sports guy, so I like to make sports analogies. The exam's the game. And if I know the game's coming, I have an incentive to practice. Even if no one's watching the practice, even though no score is taking place in the practice, I have an incentive to practice because I know that game's coming. And if I don't practice, we're going to lose the game and I'm going to look bad. And so to me, that's what homework's always been. And so the students who realize there's a game and I want to do well in the game, they should engage with the homework, or they're not going to do well in the game. And so I've actually been less concerned about AI's impact on homework than lots of other people, because I always assumed that some percentage of students were probably cheating on the homework even before AI. I think like if we structured the incentives right so that we have some verifiable assessments, whether they're exams or other in-person type of assessments, that provides an incentive for students to engage with the homework, even if they can cheat with it on AI. But I think we have to have some of those actual in-person high stakes assessments in place, or they lose that incentive.
Right.
Which I know is not always popular with some pedagogical folks, but that's I do think that those types of things are important. And actually, I think it's worth noting, Mollick in his book in one of the earlier chapters specifically says research has shown that homework and exams are valuable learning tools. So yeah. I think that to the extent that AI changes the classroom, I think that it makes some of those things that we can truly validly assess that much more important.
I mean, there's no doubt, like you said, that I learned a long time ago, or I decided a long time ago, that tests are learning opportunities, that
Yep.
It's assessment, but it's also like, I used to think of it in terms of, I have my students' attention during like 3 times a semester, basically. The rest of the time they're running around to internships and jobs and all the different sorority and fraternity things and everything else. And so I get their attention for like 3 really good attention for 3 tests a semester. And so, yeah, I use them as teaching tools, and I build a review session, I build a review sheet and all these things because I'm like, they're going to learn when I get their attention, and this is how I get their attention. But so yeah, we're definitely, and I actually use this sports metaphor too, because I'm always like, I can help you all the way up till the test. And at that point I become like a coach. I can't play the game for you.
Yep.
So we can review, come by my office, like let me talk, ask me questions. But once the game starts, I'm on the sidelines and I can't really play the game for you at all.
Yeah, I even go further with the sports metaphor when since I teach a lot of freshmen, kind of at one of my first lectures is just study habits. And I specifically ask how many of them played a sport or in band or theater in high school. And then I ask them, what if your coach came in the first day of season and said, hey, here's our strategy. We're going to do 1 practice a week until like the day before the game or the performance. And then we're going to like go 24 hours straight to prepare for the game or the performance. How many of you think you're going to have a successful season? And then like, obviously everyone realizes that's a horrible way to prepare for everything. And then obviously the kicker there is probably 80 or 90% of our students study for classes that way, right? And so to me, that's kind of like the emphasis of you need to do a little bit often and engage with the things more frequently, whether, pre-AI or post-AI. So
if we're trying to talk about AI versus like practicing with AI, like you're just saying, or like they could be saying, practicing with AI versus using AI is kind of a dichotomy. I think that he kind of talked about in the book. What can we learn how can faculty and instructors across campus, how do they prepare their students to practice with AI and not just use AI? I think that's the big question that Mollick's talking about.
No, and it is. I think this is one where the more we can message, and I think it helps if multiple professors are messaging it as well and on the same page, explaining to the extent we can why students need these skills, explain what the purpose of the assignment is. I think finding the moments where it makes sense to integrate AI.
Right.
I think some things will need to be left with, like, we need to find ways to assess without AI, but there are certain, having the ability to use AI is going to be a vital skill in the labor market moving forward. If we don't provide it to our students, we are doing them a disservice. And so we have to find, and it doesn't have to be in every class or every assignment, but we have to find the right places where, hey, here's a really good way to use AI, and engage with the students around those, and explain what the purpose of the assignment is, why the AI can be useful. I think it can be useful for them to know, like, how we use AI. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to instructors who are developing new courses, and AI can be super helpful if you're like writing a new syllabus and figuring out what readings you want to do. It can even help with lecture slides. Now you're going to going back to the expertise. None of the first product is going to be perfect. And so you have to have the expertise to go through and vet and which ones are good, which ones are bad. Discussing with the students how we use AI in our work, I think, can make them open to more proper use. And so I think the more messaging we can get, the more, this is why it's useful to have more faculty on board the AI train. And I'm not saying like as enthusiastic cheerleaders, but like recognizing that this is the world we live in now. The more people they hear it from, and the more modeling they get on proper ways to use it and how their professors are using it, I think all of those things will eventually help along those dimensions.
I'm trying to think of, I've been working on trying to create assignments for my classes that use AI, but the students learn while using AI. Like they're not
Yes.
they're not assignments where it's like, go write an essay and I come back with 180 AI essays. It's something where they have to use AI. They're encouraged. It's clearly an assignment sheet. I guess have to, they're encouraged to use AI is a better wording. They're encouraged to use AI, but it's only in a way that they're going to learn from using it in an assistant way. Like,
Yes.
that's the challenge, is creating those types of assignments and then explaining to them the thinking behind it and why it matters. I think that might be the sweet spot.
One thing that I've done both in my class, and I'm also, in the faculty fellows role, I've worked with some other professors as well. And so I'm working with a professor this semester and also partnering with someone in the writing center on a mythology class where they're integrating AI. And I do this in this master's class I teach for the Truman School of Public Affairs, where actually I do require AI to produce the first draft of this kind of one-page bullet sheet on a policy topic. And then the students have to submit the original AI version and then an edited version where they go through, and because I give them the rubric, I tell them what everything needs to be on it. And so then they need it. Really, the purpose of the assignment is to vet the AI. Did the AI actually answer all the questions you need to answer? Did it hit all the points? Did it give false information? Did it give things that you don't really want? And so, and the person I'm working with in the mythology department, they're creating these as groups, they're creating prompts, and then they're voting on a prompt that they like is the best prompt of the week, and taking the output from the AI. And the assignment's not to write your own essay. Your assignment's to critique the output from the AI. So I think kind of these where the assignment is actually critique the AI is a nice way to incorporate the AI, and once again get the students involved in noting when it's right and when it's wrong, what it's good at and what it's not good at. Now, none of these assignments are unhackable, right? Like if a student's dedicated to just only using AI for the assignment, there's ways around it. But I think assignments that require the AI, but also then require a purposeful interrogation of the AI, make students more aware of where their human role in the process comes and where AI can be fallible. And it's not, I think it makes it less likely that they just start copying and pasting willy-nilly at that point. Like, oh, I actually do need to read this stuff. So
the key would be that the assignment still requires them to engage with the content while using the AI. So if they're like you were saying, they're prompting, they're getting their response from the tool, they're evaluating the tool or the response. In that case, they're engaging with the material and critically evaluating it, and that's learning. So that's good. And at the same time, we get the second win, and they're developing a skill with the AI and habits that it is an assistant and not an automation. Another big theme for Mollick has been this idea that AI can level the playing field for the weaker students or the weaker employees in the workforce. And I definitely think I wanted to see what you thought about that, especially with your labor economics background. What did you think about that?
No, I think that's very promising. And in fact, we're obviously very early days of evaluating AI's impact on labor markets and jobs. But the early studies from a number of very different professional fields and very different jobs have suggested that the AI adds this massive boost to the low performers and doesn't necessarily help the top performers that much. I've even seen some cases where it might actually harm the top performers. But in a way, it kind of makes sense, right? Because if you think the AI is in a way a substitute for reasoning skills, critical thinking, and so on, the students, the employees that perhaps are weaker on those skills, it adds a bigger boost to. And so the early studies I've seen are actually, this is maybe one of the, I think there's plenty, and I think we'll get to these when we talk about the next chapter. There's plenty of dystopian concerns about AI, but I think this is one of the places where it does seem like at least a potential optimistic outcome is that if it raises the productivity of the low performers up to close to the level of high performers, that actually like reduces income gaps and has lots of added benefit, helps economic growth. So I think that there is a lot of promise there, and the early returns, the early research suggests that might well be true. And so my optimistic side hopes that that is that's accurate and that carries over to other professions and broadly, because I think that could have a lot of positive impacts overall on the economy. Students in education, right? If we can help supercharge the lower performing students and build them the skills they need, I think that has a lot of potential.
But what does that look like in the classroom? That's what I mean. This is not a new theme for Mollick's book. And I've been thinking about it for weeks now. And I've been like the good thing about doing this podcast and reading this book while I'm also teaching is I'm thinking about it while I'm doing the actual work. And I'm like, there are these students, like I said, in this big class who I will never see and I'll never meet. And no email will get them in my office. And they're the low performers, right? I assume that we're talking about here. So how is the AI going to help level their playing field? I guess, does it require some engagement from the student, I guess?
I think so. I think that's if the student's completely unengaged, I don't think the AI is not going to help, as is any other intervention. I think the benefit of the AI is this potential to have that one-on-one tutor, that one-on-one. I like the example in this chapter on AI as a coach when he talks about deliberate practice, which is something, I'm a sports person, and I believe that in that very much in any skill. That's why I tell the students you have to practice a little bit every day. That's like the way to build a skill, whether it's physical or mental. And I liked his analogy about the two architects. And one is, practicing every day and meeting once a week with the superiors and is slowly getting better. And the other one is like formally incorporating AI into their process. And every time they do a new sketch, they run it through the AI and ask the AI to be a mentor and a coach and give feedback and so on. And the one who's doing that constant process is improving faster than the other one, even if they're spending the same amount of time. That takes initiative by the person to recognize, hey, I'm going to use AI as this coach and this mentor. And so I think there has to be some level of the students have to be engaged. I feel like there's some paradoxes for AI in education, because we have this tool that for motivated individuals, motivated students, can supercharge their ability to learn on their own, to learn remotely. We have this tool that has the potential to individualize mass education, where every single individual has the ability to have a one-on-one mentor, coach, tutor to help them learn something. But simultaneously, because of the issues we talked about earlier about like cheating and academic integrity and so on, may well kill online learning and makes large lectures that much more difficult, because those kind of in-person verifiable assessments can be hard to scale. I read a blog post from someone, this was an AI and education blogger a month or so ago, and their argument was like, I think the title of the blog post was "Take-Home Assignments Are Dead." And they start out saying, I didn't initially think this, but with my experiences now, I do think take-home assignments are dead, or at least mostly. But their proposed solution was, well, you can still have a take-home assignment, but every take-home assignment you need to have a in-person debrief
Hmm.
so that you have a one-on-one conversation with the student to make sure they actually understand what they submitted. That's not scalable to a large lecture at all. You and I can't do that in our
Right.
large lecture classes, right?
Hmm.
So like this tool that could be very beneficial for mass educating people works best if we're in a small environment where we can actually verify that learning. So I feel like there are these inherent paradoxes with AI use in education, that we have this amazing tool that, because of some of the other issues with it, makes it that much harder to use. And I struggle when I talk to faculty members, especially people who are working in the online space. They ask, like, what are some solutions in the online space? And I do what everyone else that I've heard of in this area talks about. They punt. Like, I don't really know yet. I don't know if we have solutions. And I think it's challenging. I think there may be solutions, once again, in small environments, even in online space. But I mean, one of the benefits of online and remote learning is that you can scale it. The scalability becomes challenging because these solutions aren't super scalable.
Someone was telling me that for online that some students or people are creating fake IDs and taking classes and just collecting the financial aid. And
I have no doubt that is true. I know of cases who there was some faculty negligence here, but I've heard of cases where students were taking a full online class in a day. So they clearly weren't taking the class. They were using AI, either, the current AI tools we have, or maybe you developed an AI agent that just said, hey, go take this course for me.
the agents.
So yeah, I think the online space is a very, very challenging world in an AI infused environment.
But as far as the idea of the tutor helping to level the field, the AI as a tutor that could help level the playing field, I guess for the students that do or are engaged, I definitely have those too, that they're
Yep.
struggling in the class, but it's not because they're not trying. I'm just trying to think, like, when they're in my office and they're like, what can I do to do better on the next test so I don't fail the class? And we do all the things we've always done. Do I advise them to be like, hey, have you engaged with AI about this? I don't think I've ever done that, and I don't think I'm ready to do that right now. Like, I'm not ready to say, go spend some time with ChatGPT, ask it all about my class, go through the study guide with ChatGPT. I don't think I'm ready to say that. I don't think I would trust the tool to inform them on a level that they would pass the test.
So I actually have done that.
Okay.
So
Yeah, tell me about that. Definitely, please.
in two different levels. So at one level, the textbook I use, it's published by Macmillan, and they've created an AI tutor within their learning software. And it's actually like a really cool tool because it's designed, it will never answer a question for you. It will keep asking questions to try to lead you there. It will never actually answer the question.
But it's also
So
designed based on the knowledge base of the textbook,
true,
right?
true.
Okay, so
That's 100% true. So it has
close.
a little bit of that benefit that it's definitely contained within the subject matter. So I've told students about that, and students are using it.
Yes.
But I've told them that they can use chat. I recommend. I tell them I recommend that they come and see the tutors and the TAs and me in person, because I feel like that personal interaction is valuable. But I also told them that if you feel intimidated or you don't have time or whatever, don't have a problem with them using ChatGPT. And I try to teach them how to use it well.
Mm-hmm.
I talk about the issues of, like, give it a persona. Tell it that it's tell them who you are. I'm an undergraduate student at the University of Missouri, taking a Principles of Microeconomics course. Tell them my name. Like, I'm taking it with Eric Parsons. I have enough. I've taught this class long enough. There's some stuff out in the world about what I teach and things like that. Or even tell them I'm using the Cowan and Tabrock textbook. Tell ChatGPT the class what you're doing. Ask it to be a tutor, and a patient tutor. Give it the features that you want it to give you, that you want it to have. Iterate with it. If it gives an explanation to understand, say, hey, could you explain that in a different way? Explain it to me like I'm 10 years old. And I explain how they can use it properly to be a tutor. And that's part of that coaching of how do we make it practice instead of just automation.
Mm-hmm.
Is teaching them how. And I tell them, like, you could take our homework questions and enter it in, and it's gonna get it right most of the time, not all the time. It's funny. I've had some students this semester email me like, the AI is telling me I'm right. So I know I'm right on this question. I'm like, no, you're actually wrong on this question. And I can explain why. So it's not always, but it's going to do a good job on it, but you're not actually going to learn and understand the material. And so I'm like, if you want to use it as a tool, you can actually use it as a very useful tool to help you learn and understand the information. And that's one thing I emphasize well before AI. I tell them, you cannot memorize your way through this class. The tests are about like, can you understand and apply what we're talking about?
Right.
Memorization is not useful at all. And so I try to give them like, here is how you would use it to help build your understanding so that you actually perform well on the test and on the exam. And once again, I do feel like my field is a little, like the course I teach is a little bit more okay with that because it's a bit more standardized. The new models are pretty good, and I think they could work pretty well across the board. Just following up on how well they can perform, this was an unfortunate development that happened. I gave an exam in my class last week, and we discovered a student was using an AI plugin. So the exams, we give them in person, and we have in-person proctors, but we administer it on Canvas. So students have to bring their laptop, iPad, something like that to take the test. There's a plugin that the students could use that if they hit the button, it answered the question for them. There was no pop-up. You didn't have to copy or paste anything. And then one of my TAs played with it later. The only reason we found out was because we saw the button on the student's screen and the student wasn't using it optimally. My TA found out that you could change the color of the button so it matches the background color. So there's no way a proctor could see it, right? But to just kind of state the quality of it, the tests are like 30 questions, and ran it through 3 times, and it got between a 26 and a 28 out of 30, which is a very good grade overall in the class. Mm-hmm. And I know like the most up-to-date AIs perform well on things like the bar exam and lots of other exams. So I actually think in general, for the most part, unless there's like very specific course knowledge, it's probably safe to set them free on ChatGPT with training on how do you prompt it to help you, not just give you the answer.
Do you do you hand them a handout on how to use it? Do you put it in the syllabus? Is it in the assignment sheet? Like, how do you train your students on how to properly use it as a tool?
So to be fair, that's something I can probably improve on.
We all can improve on that.
I mention it in the syllabus. The first day of class, I have a whole slide or 2 on it. I discuss it with them. I try to like follow up with them at least a couple times in the semester talking about it and about the proper way to do it. I could probably reinforce it more. It's like all of us, right? All of our classes have lots of content. And so we get rolling in the content, and I should probably follow up more often. I've heard people talk about providing like AI resources in a syllabus, not just an AI syllabus statement about what's allowed and not allowed, but actually like resources and, maybe some a bit on like proper prompts and things like that, or how best to prompt it, how best to use it as a tutor. I could see including that. I mean, obviously the issue is students generally don't read syllabi. That's why I make sure to talk about it in class on that first day.
Right.
I could reinforce it more, I'll fully admit. So.
Well, I keep asking about it, but I feel like we're going to run out of time before we get to the second chapter, which is a little shorter though. I don't think it had much to talk about. I think there's really one big thing, and that he's talking about the future of AI and, the learner in terms of ideas about teaching and learning. And he presents 4 possible scenarios for the future of AI. So the obvious question will be, I'm going to read them for those who have not read the book. But the question I'm trying to ask myself and you and maybe listeners too is, which of these 4 sounds like the most likely future for AI in the teaching and learning environment for us, of course. First one is, this is as good as it gets. That's the lowest level of the AI future. The setting's on low. It's going to be like this. It's just about AI is not going to improve. It's just this. Mm-hmm. 2 is slow growth, like slow, deliberate, consistent growth as it becomes more and more complex. 3 is exponential growth, where it suddenly, quickly, and massively increases in its ability to be used or influential. And then fourth, is fourthly a word? Fourth,
it works.
I think we need to, it's getting late in the day. So is the machine God option, right? Which is the polar opposite of as good as it gets, where it's basically general artificial intelligence, kind of the Terminator level AI. So where do you think, what do you think? What's your prediction? Which of the 4 is most correct?
So I think it's interesting. Like, obviously this book's pretty new. It just came out in 2024. Since it came out, I think we've well blown past as good as it gets already.
Right.
And
Okay,
we
fair.
may have already blown past slow growth.
Okay.
So when he wrote this, I think like the frontier model is ChatGPT 4. I obviously read the book, but I also follow Mollick's blog. He had a blog post this week talking about like the newest frontier models, and like the best one being ChatGPT 4.0 with the little o, which is like their the signifier that it's like completely different. It sounds like it's as much of an advancement over 4 as 4 was over 3.5, maybe even more so. Tyler Cowen, interestingly, so Tyler Cowen's an economist. He's a co-author of the textbook I use, interestingly enough, but he's also a columnist, a blogger, and a close AI follower. On his blog, he feels like ChatGPT 4.0 is already artificial general intelligence.
Oh,
like
that's a big claim.
He's like, I've seen it, and this is it. So I think as good as it gets is already gone.
Okay.
At least as far as we're talking, as good as it gets when Mollick wrote the book. I will say I'm not the machine god one. I'm not convinced on that. So I think I fall somewhere between the slow growth and exponential growth viewpoints. I haven't played with 4.0 yet enough to say ultimately, and I think this chapter goes into deep waters, right? Like we're moving into deep waters when we're talking about these types of things. But this issue of like what is sentience and how do we define it? Cowan in his post, when he talks about AGI, he's like, I guess it's like the old definition of pornography. I'll know it when I see it, and I've seen it. So I feel like sentience is kind of the same way. But I guess to me, the one thing that I don't think it has now, and this will be like this is where I think the machine god type aspects would come in. I feel it doesn't have initiative, right? So at Mollick's blog post, he shows how, so for very people who've read the book, he had the cheese, the artisanal cheese store, right, example, and he used ChatGPT 4 to come up with slogans, and some of them were good, some of them were bad, and so on. So he took that and expanded it a little bit and gave it to the newest version, and it came like up with business plans and marketing plans and like what types of cheese, and just and it clearly had the ability to make decisions on its own through this process. So very impressive, and obviously can clearly do a lot of human tasks. That said, it still took that initial paragraph from Mollick to get it going, right? So like like right now, there's no initiative there. It has to be prompted by someone to get it started. Now, if there becomes a point where there's initiative that's developed, then we move into machine god phase. And I think, like Mollick says, we can't predict what that world even looks like. And worrying about that world strips us of our agency and stops us from like thinking about it in ways that will matter if it's the second and third ones, right? Slow growth or exponential growth. So in general, I found that slow growth, exponential growth viewpoint, which still come with plenty of challenges.
But do you think I think my question is it going to level out for long enough to catch our breaths, right? Like most technological innovation, it's sped up so much, right? We got the VCR, and like, okay, this is super cool. Let's have 20 years to use VCRs. We got DVD players, but it's sped up. Like, is there going to be a moment where it's like everything's a liquid, I feel like right now? And is it going to solidify long enough to settle down and say, okay, this is the territory, and then maybe liquefy again? And so far, it just stays in a liquid form of constant change.
Completely agree. And I feel like that description, I really like that description. I feel like that's that distinction between that slow growth and exponential growth in the chapter. Like the slow growth is it's slow enough that we can catch our breath and come up with policies and adapt. The exponential growth happens so fast that it's that much harder to adapt.
Yeah.
And it's interesting, before these newest frontier models came out, I was actually reading blog posts and articles saying, it's slowed down. We may be already at the frontier. It's not going to get much better. Some people were already predicting that. And then just within a month or two, it's like, whoa, we jumped over that pond and went way, way beyond. So I think I don't have a good prediction there. I think it will slow. I do. I think we'll get to a point where we can catch our breath, but I would not bet a lot of money on it, to be honest about it. So
thinking about all of these things we talked about, what you've been working for as an AI fellow in the art school in the College of Arts and Sciences. What kind of like, as my understanding, you've developed some materials for teachers and for instructors. Is that accurate?
I've more collected
Okay,
materials.
collected.
So
Okay.
I created a resource page in Canvas that all the instructors and faculty members in ANS have access to. Because I mean, part of the role of this faculty fellow is keeping in touch with other things that are happening on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, as the fellow for the Teaching for Learning Center, the Teaching and Learning Center is already doing great stuff in this realm. There's no need for me to duplicate everything that they're
Mm-hmm.
doing. And I hope in the future we can maybe partner on some things.
Right.
So, Mizzou Online, the ed tech
Mm-hmm.
people are
Yeah,
doing
yeah.
great things like on this. In fact, I was on the call. They do a monthly call, a system-wide call. So all 4 campuses that Mizzou Online hosts, discussing like where we are with AI and updates and so on. They're doing great stuff. They have great resources on their website. So a lot of it was me collecting these resources that were already out there and putting them in one place so the faculty members know where they're at, both internal Mizzou and external as well. And I'm constantly updating it. I'm sending out announcements. When I discovered this new tool that students could use to cheat, I sent that out on that list
Mm-hmm.
to say, hey, if you're doing exams using Canvas with a laptop, you basically have to use some type of lockdown browser anymore. Otherwise, even if your in-person proctoring is not going to be sufficient at this point in time. So that was a big piece of what I did the first semester and into the semester. I've started trying to do more faculty focused workshops. I did one with biology, advertised it to other departments, and still kind of waiting on take up, where I would go in and have the faculty members who are interested come in and bring in assignments from their class. Mm-hmm. And part of it was expose them to the tools and hey, let's put this assignment into ChatGPT and see how well it does. And I think some of them were pretty impressed, like, oh man, this could do more than I thought. And then springboard from that into, okay, how can we redesign the assessment to still, the students can't just use ChatGPT, and how can we incorporate it in appropriate ways and not? So having those discussions with faculty members, and then also kind of showing them how they could use it not just for teaching, for research. We looked at Research Rabbit, which I think is like a really cool tool. Yeah. Things like Chat PDF or Notebook LM, which can be useful in teaching a class as well, but also very useful for research, for summarizing, and giving them these ideas about what tools are there, how they can potentially use them in the classroom. So kind of this role of faculty fellow, I feel it's very broad, sometimes a bit nebulous, but I feel part of it is like an awareness campaign, like get faculty, obviously everyone knows that AI exists, but like make them more aware of what it is, how it works, what tools are available, be a resource for other faculty who are thinking about how they can deal with AI in their classroom, whether it's embrace, find ways to like assess without, a combination of the two, working with faculty there, be a conduit to administration and other places on campus, and kind of be this coordinating aspect as well. So we aren't just constantly duplicating effort across the board. And so that's kind of the roles that I've tried to play over this past, 8-9 months that I've been in the faculty fellow role.
What would you say? I think there's a lot of faculty and instructors on campus who are just like, I don't want to use AI. I don't want to be made to use AI, and they have valid concerns. Absolutely.
100%.
But, as faculty start thinking about the next semester syllabi and course design, what would you say to a faculty member who is AI adverse, but realizes that they probably need to know a little something about it, at least just to write a good policy about how their students shouldn't use it? What would you tell them? How should they get started?
That's a great question. And so my first semester as faculty fellow in the fall, I kind of did a grand tour of ANS. I tried to go to each department's faculty meeting. I didn't make it all. ANS is a huge college.
Okay.
There's 30-some departments. So I didn't make it to quite all of them, but I made it to the majority. And I also hit some other places of importance like the Disability Center, Office of Academic Integrity, Campus Writing Lab, to raise awareness, gather information, and hear people's thoughts. And the very first thing I said when I went is like, I am not an AI cheerleader. Right. I do not see that as my role. My general thought process, though, is like, it's okay to be AI skeptical or maybe even AI averse, it's no good at this point in time to be a denier. There's no, like, it's out there, genie's out of the bottle, it exists, students are using it. If we don't pay attention to it, we risk becoming obsolete. So my advice for people who are fairly AI averse but recognize that they need to at least think about it, which actually, that's one thing that I found. There are obviously some faculty members who are like AI gung-ho, right? They're like jumping in with both feet, using it for everything. And there are certainly some faculty members who are like extremely AI resistant and don't want to even think about it or use it at all. I actually think that last group, what I found is that group's pretty small. I think most of us fit in this pragmatic middle, various degrees. It's a spectrum, not specific buckets, but concerned about AI, but also cognizant of the fact that if it's here, it exists, and we have to learn how to use it. And I do think this is one place where I think Mollick is 100% correct. Even if you are adversarial to AI, go like the old phrase, know thine enemy, right? You have to actually use it and spend some time with it if you want to combat it. If you want, like, I don't think we necessarily always have to take a combative role. In fact, I think that's not the best option. But if you are in a combative state, you can only combat what you know, and you need to spend time with it as well. And interestingly, in that system talk call this morning, someone brought up a recent study. And so the general view is that humans aren't good at detecting AI if it's AI written stuff, as long as it's done well. Like, obviously, right, really poorly prompted things we can tell. Mm-hmm. But the general viewpoint has been, if something's properly iterated, humans can't detect AI writing. This recent study, now it's a small sample size, it's early, so we can't hang all our hat on this one study. This study found that actually, among heavy AI users, they are much, much, much better at detecting AI-generated, even good AI-generated writing, versus people who are just like moderate to low users or not users at all. So to me, that's like the biggest encouragement of all, that you need to go out and use it. Like those 3 sleepless nights that Mollick talks about, you need to use it and try to incorporate it into lots of stuff, because the more you use it, the better you're going to be able to tell when students are using it, and then you can address those concerns. I will say most faculty I've met have been in that middle of skeptical, but recognizing that they need to think about it. But I also think faculty largely overestimate their ability to detect AI. Mm-hmm. I think by general, I've certainly gotten the sense from people like, oh, I'm always going to be able to, if a student writes an AI, I'm going to know. And that's one of the information, like, awareness raisings I've been saying. It's like, no, you can't, if they use it well. You've seen it's a confirmation bias type thing. You've seen some really bad AI that you know are bad AI. You've recognized those, but there's probably people who are using it well who you never notice, and you'll never know. Yeah. Using AI helps you actually be able to detect it. And so spending that time with it and learning how it writes and learning how, for want of a better word, thinks, is actually going to make you a better instructor and a better user of AI and a better detector and guide for our students. If you can, like, you clearly used AI in this, let's talk about it, something like that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, we're not in a position, I don't feel like we're in a position where we can very often confidently prosecute, I think I don't know what the word is, like, say this was AI and I'm penalizing you for it. It's pretty hard to do without causing actually even legal concerns, probably.
I think that's 100% accurate. And in fact, when I did that grand tour, I met with Ben Trachtenberg, who's a law professor who runs our Department of Academic Integrity. Ben's a great guy. I had a great conversation with him. But he flat out told me, and this is a message I've been spreading when I've been doing these meetings, if someone pursues an academic integrity case and their only evidence is their gut feeling and an AI detector, he's not going to pursue the case. And so I think one thing they mentioned in the call this morning is it does seem like the AI detectors are getting better, but I feel like that's an arms race we're always going to lose. And there's enough false positives. Right. Me personally, I would never feel comfortable using that in a punitive sense against a student.
I think it's really comes down to us being able to change our assignments in a way that they are either AI proof or AI incorporated, depending on what we're trying to accomplish. Because like, if we don't give them sufficient guidance, it's just human nature, I guess.
Completely agree. I think that's the way forward. Like, detecting and policing for writing, I think it's just not, it's not a feasible solution. And I don't think it's a way forward. I'm actually struggling with this in this master's class I teach, which is an online class, so obviously that more difficult space. One of the key parts of the class, and this is a part of the class that students have always, in student evaluations, found very valuable, is every week I find current events articles, and I search out new ones every single semester. And I normally give them somewhere between 3 to 5 articles that are related to the content we're talking in class that day. And their assignment is to read one of the articles and make a discussion board post, and then hopefully start discussion. I tell them, like, you don't have to start with an original post. You can like comment on someone else's, and that counts for your credit. I want you guys to debate with each other. Last year, even though, ChatGPT was available, I didn't think it was problematic. This semester I'm teaching it, and I'm seeing a lot more very clearly AI written stuff. So, these are master students who we would hope are like motivated, engaged learners, right? And so I'm struggling, like, how am I going to redesign this in the future? Because that's a tricky thing to redesign. And so it's a struggle across the board, even with, graduate students who we would hope, have that motivation. So it is tricky to think, how are we going to redesign our assignments? How are we going to redesign our classes to overcome these issues? And it's, it's an ongoing challenge. And I think anyone who says they have a solution at this point is lying. So we're all in it together, and we all got to help each other out.
Well, hopefully, I feel like we're ending our podcast with our episode without solving all the problems for everybody. But like you said, hopefully it's just, it's an AI critical literacy podcast. Exactly. So hopefully just being engaged with this discussion will help people think of things they might not have thought of, or think of ideas. And that's the whole goal. I'm not here to tell people what to do, right? I'm here to give them the resources that they can use to decide what they should do. So, well, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's been great getting to know you.
For having me. Yeah. Great conversation.